Our focus at this hour is on the war in Ukraine. Since the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, defensive military assistance has been provided to Kyiv by its allies. The use of the reference defensive military assistance is the key. For a long time, the US has been asking Ukraine not to use its military equipment to carry out attacks inside Russian territory. But now Moscow has claimed that Washington and London have helped Ukraine orchestrate last week's unprecedented strike on the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in annexed Crimea. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that there is not the slightest of doubt that the attack was planned in advance using Western intelligence assets, NATO satellite equipment and reconnaissance aircraft. Ukraine claimed responsibility for a missile attack that struck the headquarters of Moscow's Black Sea Fleet, which sparked a huge fire. Moscow said the attack left one Russian serviceman missing, while Kyiv claimed that the strike killed 34 officers. We are now being joined by Professor David Dunn, Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham. Professor David, welcome to the show. What do you make of Russia's claim that the US and Britain collaborated with Ukraine to strike the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in annexed Crimea?
Well, this is clearly a Russian attempt to try and frame their increasing vulnerability in Crimea as being clearly the hand of somebody else other than Ukraine, because Ukraine couldn't do it themselves. It's an attempt to downplay the role of Ukraine as it inflicts damage on the Russian presence in occupied Ukraine, including Crimea, which of course is occupied Ukraine. But there has been an increase in the technology and assistance that the Western powers have been giving to Ukraine. Over 19 months now, they've gone from purely defensive weapons to weapons that have longer range and greater strikeability. That's true of tanks, the supply of Leopard tanks and Challenger tanks and Abrams tanks. It's true of the promise of F-16 aircraft, and it's true of the use of these long-range cruise missiles like the Storm Shadow that's reportedly responsible for the attack on the naval headquarters in Ukraine.
Professor, Russia is now warning of repercussions following the attack. Any idea of what Moscow could do to both London and Washington, with the Kremlin having a record of avenging tactics, and what impact would that have on the ongoing conflict?
Well, Russia has been making these noises for the last 18 months or so. The idea of trying to deter further Western involvement and support for Ukraine, and they have never yet actually acted on that. It's an attempt to try and prevent support for Ukraine in its effort to repel the Russians. So it's yet to be seen whether this is any more than rhetorical bluff. But if they were to try and escalate the conflict, then that risks, of course, bringing NATO into the war. So far, we've seen some NATO weapons used against Russia with devastating effect. If it was the case that NATO was provoked into the war entirely, then the Russians could expect a different order of response. But because of that risk of conflagration, the Russians have so far failed to escalate, even in response to acts like this, which of course do seem to be the result of Western supplied technology and indeed probably Western intelligence.
All right, I've been talking to Professor of International Politics at University of Birmingham, Professor David Dunn. Thank you very much for your insights and for talking to WION World is One today.
Good afternoon.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.